Thanks for coming back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Gareth, we've seen a still very strong construction sector moving ahead. Residential activity still going quite well. Job numbers in construction is also roaring. But we are starting to hear some of those signs of supply chain issues which are impacting the construction sector. I mean, what have we heard in recent times?
Yeah, I mean, those supply chain issues are not limited to construction, but certainly in terms of getting material here. Look, talking to people 3 or 4 months ago, it was very much around the delays that people were experiencing, sort of 6 to 10 weeks in some cases in getting product from China or other parts of the world. Those delays haven't got any better, but what's I think more concerning now is that you're starting to hear stories of some quite big cost increases or price rises coming through for those shipping services. In some cases, those container costs more than doubling from what firms were facing before, and that's placing pressure on the costs that those firms are there for, or the prices they're having to pass on to their customers. Some firms are looking to hold the prices and look at the long-standing relationships they've got, but that does rely on that disruption being a somewhat temporary phenomenon. And at this stage, there's not really any signs of it clearing up or getting better yet. So, the longer it persists, the more likely we are to see cost increases coming through. Of course, it also means that it's taking longer for work to get done in the construction industry as well.
Yeah, and I guess particularly on that last point, we've had some very, very strong consent numbers coming through. Again, particularly on that residential side, we're just shy of the 40,000 per annum, incredible figures. But in a sense, it's important to keep in mind that those are building intentions rather than building activity, because certainly the feeling you start to get is although we could be at this peak of consent activity, the actual level of construction happening might be a little bit lower than that, which also could mean that the actual level or amount volume of construction activity that happens could be spread out a little bit longer, just because those consents can't all move ahead. We've got these supply chain issues which are slowing things down. In fact, we also know that we're looking for more workers because firms are saying, look, I just don't have the people to do all of this work. Either you have to pay me more or you go to the back of the line and your project might take a little bit longer. So in a sense, we are likely to see that there's still going to be a relatively strong body of work moving forward then.
Yeah, that's right. Look, 40,000 consents, or almost 40,000 dwelling consents over the last year. And like you say, look, at the peak of the cycle, we always see that those projects tend to take longer to go from consent through to completion. If there's not much activity around, it might be 4 to 6 months. You can push some of those projects through. But we know that generally speaking, it's pushing up well over 12 months now on average for projects, and some of those will be taking a lot longer. It's interesting you mentioned some of those sort of labour pressures. The most recent quarterly survey of business opinion from the NZIER showed that more than 50% of building firms are saying capacity and labour are the main constraint on them expanding their activity further. That's the most that have responded that since the survey began back in 1975. Another measure from that showed capacity utilisation in the industry sitting at 99.1%. That's a big figure. The previous record was 95.5% back last year. So it's really spiked up. There's a lot of pressures there, and firms are not able to access some of the foreign workers that they would have been able to previously. We know construction was a high profile area in terms of the government's skill shortages list prior to COVID hitting and looking to target people from offshore. So yeah, real issues there in the construction industry, and it does mean, like you say, that work is just going to take longer to get done. We know there's big training numbers coming through in the likes of the BCITO with some of the initiatives the government's put in there, but it will take time for that to actually turn into sort of productive workers that can really contribute to expanding activities. So yeah, major sort of digestion issues in the construction industry at the moment with all that's going on.
And very much, I mean, there is a lot of activity, and I think that's the big challenge, is that there's a lot of private sector stuff. Central government's obviously come through with its shovel-ready projects and similar. They're still sort of taking a while to get going, but there's all of that activity, all the local government construction as well. And it almost seems like for construction, the issues we've got now are not so much COVID-related, aside for those supply chain issues. They're sort of those capacity constraints we always were asking about over the 3 years prior to COVID starting to come through. So, there is going to be that pressure on prices going higher, and I think we've seen that coming through for residential in the latest, some of the cost pressures coming through. We've got more people that are trying to work in that sector, but even more needing to be brought forward. And then, like you said, some of the skills gaps that are going to emerge because of migration. So quite a lot swirling around in that sector, and I think, you know, something we will keep a very close eye on, given just how important the construction sector is currently to the economy, to that sort of rebuild of momentum. So some fascinating yet slightly worrying trends, I think, starting to emerge. But look, we'll keep an eye on that and everything else in the construction sector, and we'll hopefully bring an update to everyone on one of our future editions of Econ Talks.